This is the 15 Love with Randy Walker podcast because the world needs another podcast. So today I want to talk a little bit about attendance records in tennis. We just had the match for Africa featuring Roger Federer against Rafael Nadal in Cape Town, South Africa, in the football stadium there, the Cape Town Stadium. And the exhibition match, which was won by Roger Federer, for those keeping score, the attendance was 51,954, which set a new all-time attendance record for a tennis match. So this broke the record that was set just in November, a couple months ago, when Federer and Alexander Zverev played an exhibition match in Mexico City at the Plaza de Toros Bull Ring in front of 42,517. So that was the previous record prior to Roger and Rafa playing in Cape Town. Now, prior to that, the largest crowd to watch a match was also an exhibition match. This was the Battle of Belgium branded match that featured Serena Williams and Kim Clijsters, and that was played in Brussels in front of a crowd of 35,861 fans. This was in the year 2010, and that was the new record, which broke the record that was previously set by the famous Battle of the Sexes match, in 1973 at the Houston Astrodome between Billie Jean King and Bobby Riggs, won famously by Billie Jean King. And that was at the Houston Astrodome, and the attendance at that match was 30,492. So that was the benchmark for many years, 30,492, Battle of the Sexes, Houston Astrodome. Now, one thing that you'll notice in all of these matches that I'm spitting out the attendance records for is they're all exhibition matches. They're all created matches, not quote-unquote sanctioned matches, not actual matches that quote-unquote count on a player's record. So, I have a history of, being a historian in tennis and record keeper in tennis back to my days at the USTA, and being the editor and publisher of the Bud Collins History of Tennis. So I've been keeping track of these stats, and I like to divide them or separate them, I should say, as far as attendance records for exhibition matches and attendance records for actual sanctioned matches. So when you factor in sanctioned matches, still hasn't reached that 30,000 threshold of the Billie Jean King Bobby Riggs match in 1973, or the other ones that I mentioned. But the largest crowd to watch a sanctioned tennis match was at the 2017 Davis Cup final in Lille, France. This was France against Belgium in 2017, and the crowd number for that was, I don't have it right in front of me, 27,438, I think it was. Hold on for a second. I just tweeted this out. You can follow me on Twitter at Tennis Publisher, and I'm actually writing an article on this for WorldTennisMagazine.com, so you can check those two trusted sources for all of these statistics. But it is interesting that Davis Cup has had the largest crowds for sanctioned matches. But the official stat for that 2017 France-Belgium tie was 27,448 fans. This was France's win over Belgium in 2017 in Lille. And just 3 years prior to that, another was the previous record for a sanctioned match, which was when Roger Federer and Switzerland won the Davis Cup, also in Lille against France, and the crowd was 27,438. So just a dozen or so fans less than the 2017 mark. It is interesting that Roger Federer is a part of many of these records, not coincidentally provided his amazing global fame. But prior to that 2014 Davis Cup final, another Davis Cup tie set the record, the previous record, which was in 2004, where the USA and Spain played a Davis Cup final in Sevilla, Spain, which I happened to be at. And that was where Andy Roddick, Marty Fish, and the Bryan brothers took on Carlos Moya and Spain, and also featuring a young teenage Spanish left-handed player who not a lot of people knew at the time. He was ranked about 50 in the world. His name was Rafael Nadal. But that match in Sevilla, which was in their soccer stadium, featured 27,200 fans. That's how many tickets they sold each day, and they sold out. So that was the attendance figure that they gave out, was 27,200. Now, I was the Davis Cup press officer at the time, and knowing that they had sold those tickets and that the crowd was going to be 27,200, I knew that that was going to break the long-time previous record for a Davis Cup for a sanctioned match, which was from 1954, which was 50 years earlier, and this was kind of the standard for sanctioned tennis matches, for 50 years. It was the 1954 Davis Cup Challenge Round, which was then what the final was known as, and it was when the United States, led by Tony Trabert and Vic Satius and Ham Richardson, went to Australia and played against Ken Rosewall and Lou Hode and Team Australia at the White City Club and Stadium in Sydney. And that crowd that was at that match was, oh boy, I don't have this in front of me, but luckily I have my copy of the Bud Collins History of Tennis right in front of me, and that crowd was 26,578. 26,578. USA, Australia. United States won that tie 3-1. That was one of the most famous Davis Cup matches of all time, and obviously with the huge crowd in temporary stadiums, I might add, temporary stadium there at White City, that was the standard for sanctioned tennis matches for many years. In anticipation of that 2004 USA-Spain Davis Cup tie, I was the press officer for the U.S. Davis Cup team. We did a press event in New York City to preview that tie and to discuss the all-time attendance records and that famous win by the United States in 1954. So we hosted a tapas lunch in the Spanish restaurant called Solera on the Upper East Side on 53rd Street, which actually is no longer in business, but as restaurants do in New York City, short-lived at times. But we did a media event there where we flew in those three guys that played in that 1954 team. We brought Tony Trabert and Vic Satius and Ham Richardson to New York City to talk to the press and talk about that 1954 tie in Sydney and the large crowd, and then had New York's own Patrick McEnroe, who was the Davis Cup captain at the time, to preview the tie and so forth. So that was kind of a fun media event, harkening back to the history of the Davis Cup, one of the most historic competitions in tennis. But it is interesting when you're looking at permanent structure tennis attendances or permanent structure tennis events. Of course, the largest tennis stadium in the world is Arthur Ashe Stadium, and they have hosted, the Arthur Ashe Stadium has hosted the largest crowd to watch a tennis match in a permanent structure at a single event, not one of these temporary constructions for these Davis Cup finals. But the current capacity for Arthur Ashe Stadium is 23,771 seats. That's the largest tennis stadium in the world, the largest permanent tennis stadium in the world. So they annually get the largest individual crowd to watch a match for the year for a regular event. But the record for the largest crowd to watch a U.S. Open match and watch a sanctioned regular tour event was actually a crowd of 25,250 fans who watched the 2007 U.S. Open men's singles final between Roger Federer and Novak Djokovic, won by Federer. Now, you may ask, why was it almost 2,000 seats more than it is now? It's because that was in the old configuration of Arthur Ashe Stadium that did not have the big screen TVs in the corner and didn't have the roof. So when those additions were made to Arthur Ashe Stadium, they lost seats. So now the largest crowd to watch a U.S. Open match is 25,200, and that record probably won't be broken unless there's a new U.S. Open stadium in the future that's bigger, decades from now. But one of the things I also wrote about in WorldTennisMagazine.com that's quite interesting, which actually could break that record, and I called out the Miami Open to potentially try for this record. But now that the Miami Open is played in the football stadium, Hard Rock Stadium, there is a way that they probably could wedge in more than 25,000 or 27,000 people in the crowd. The football stadium seats, 50, 60,000, etc. I don't have that off the top of my head. But they have it configured for a crowd of about 17,000, which is a kind of a stadium within a stadium that's in the lower bowl on the field. And then on the west side of the stadium, they incorporate the football seating in the lower deck and also in the upper deck. So, their capacity is 17,000. But if you kind of reconfigured the stadium a little bit or sold some not so great seats or some maybe slightly obstructed view seats, you could pack that house. You could probably get in about 27,000 seats. I sat in the crowd last year, in the first year that the stadium hosted the Miami Open, and kind of counted out sections and so forth, and figured that with a little creativity, they probably could wedge in a record crowd there. So certainly would get some headlines, get some more attention, draw some attention to the tournament. So if the folks at the Miami Open are listening to this, might be a good idea, might be a good promotion, media stunt to try to pull off. Certainly that match for Africa with the venue and Roger versus Rafa and the record crowd added to the buzz of that event, added to the PR value of the event, global headlines, etc. So anyway, that's my discussion today on tennis attendances, and appreciate you listening to the 15 Love podcast, where we try to keep the podcast under 15 minutes because people have things to do, places to be, people to meet, and you don't have time to listen to podcasts that last for an hour. So for 15 Love with Randy Walker, sayonara.